All right, good morning. Yes, that's loud, huh? And I'm already a loud individual anyway, so we should probably turn that down like a half a lot. All right, so by show of hands, who did not go out at all after closing ceremonies? Kudos to you responsible people in New Orleans. Who stayed out past 10 o'clock? Outstanding. Who stayed out past midnight? Oh boy. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. Oh boy, we're down to 2. Hold on. Were you 2 together? 3 a.m. Put your hand back up. I went home with you. All right. So my name is Robert Block. I'm the vice president of something relevant to IAM at Optive Security. I've been in this space for about 16 years, back since it was directory services, and then meta directory services, and then identity management, and then governance, and now it's just this big thing, right? So there are 3 tracks you'll hear today in the next hour. The first one sort of sets the stage for the next 2. Today we're going to talk about identity integrations and what that means to the rest of cybersecurity in our industry as a whole. And then you'll hear a good friend of mine, David Gordon, get up and talk about a specific integration between identity and SIM. And then you'll hear another good friend of mine, Larry Whiteside, will come up. He's a former CISO in a number of organizations. He'll come up and talk about why is this relevant to a CISO, and is identity management impactful to a CISO, and what that means to their organization. So we all know that what we do is hard. How we audit, how we control, how we defend is difficult. That lack of visibility that we have into our defense mechanisms and who's doing what at times is very complex and creates vulnerabilities. This is not meant to say that every investment that we have today is a failure, but as a single defense mechanism, they all still fall short. You've heard for at least a day and a half now that the perimeter is disappearing. You heard in yesterday's conversation from Aubrey Turner that identity is the new perimeter. This whole idea of this single defense, the outer bounds, the perimeter-centric approach, it's effective enough, but not quite, right? There's still a breach every week. There's still a new threat attack every week. There's still vulnerabilities that exist. Again, the lack of visibility is making us, as an infrastructure, less effective, as an industry less effective. The ability to report who's doing what and how is less effective. And it continues to get harder. So as we look at every layer within the infrastructure, from the desktop to big data, the one thing that's relevant across every one of those touch points is the idea of identity, right? So your desktop has identities. Where you are in the data center, the applications you use have identities. The data center, the servers themselves have a concept of identity. Within the cloud, there's identity. On your device, it's an identity. As we evolve and get more complex, the one commonality to all of that is identity. It's almost to the effect that personally, I can't get my head or hands around where identity really stops. It's literally everywhere. It's from the satellite device that geo-tracks us, to the device we're on, to the way we authenticate, to us as a consumer versus us as an employee versus us as a person. Identity is literally in almost every touch point in our lives today. So what we've learned at Optive over the last 3 to 4 years is everyone is working with identity at some level today. Let's see if this will work. There we go. So we like to put things in buckets so we can understand them. right? So we still have a number of customers that are sort of getting started in IAM. I would say that's about 30% of our customers today. Still trying to understand, how do I plan, then I have to build, then I have to run, what is my people and processes and data and technology sort of the afterthought in that equation? What does all that look like for me putting stuff together? Then we have a number of customers, probably 60% of them sort of implementing IAM today. So they've done one or more of those functions. They've built something, either a privileged solution or SSO, or they've done some level of identity management or identity governance. Probably 10 to 20% of our customers live in this world today where there's this managing identity programs as a more mature program, right? So they're investing in a number of these services in a more formal structure with governance and cohesive stakeholders and a roadmap and a plan, et cetera. And really, it's these folks probably most prepared for where do we go next generation in IAM. These folks are asking, these folks are preparing, these folks are still trying to get their head around identity in general. But what does this next gen mean? Like what is identity-defined security? Obviously, you've heard that a couple of times this conference already. And so what we're really saying is, how does identity in the middle, or the hub, help create value in these other areas of investment relative to cybersecurity? So again, identity-defined security, not a novel term, not really a new idea, right? Andre Durant, 2 years ago at CIS, sort of coined that phrase initially. In reality, what we're really talking about is, how do we better prepare for today's ever-evolving threat landscape and vulnerabilities and attack vectors? How do we, in this breach-a-week world, how do we better define what we do from a security perspective? And we believe that identity-defined security will essentially help us be more effective in that mission. So we've created this Identity-Defined Security Alliance, Ping and Optiv, came together with a number of other partners to really sort of build an integration framework that redefines how we approach security. So in summary, things today are working. Your SIM solution, your governance and risk solution, your privileged identity solution, your current identity management solution, they're all effectively making strides towards progress in your own environment. But the CISOs, do I have any CISOs in here by chance? The CISOs, so we'll pick on them. Shh, don't tell. The CISOs are still saying, hey, I don't have a single pane of glass to understand what's going on. I still get attacked. We still get breached. We still have this misunderstanding around how to be more effective. And so the one thing we're hearing and learning is that we have to move from this reactive, snapshot-based, single defense mechanism approach to security to this more interactive, intelligence-based, risk-based decision-making approach to security. IDSA is this mechanism by which the industry will learn how to leverage this new approach to cybersecurity. So in the Alliance, our job to work with partners is to build out formalized use cases, build out integration packages, build out demonstrations, bring all this concept of identity-defined security to reality. If you're more interested in learning what we have to, what IDSA has to offer, Taylor Hook, are you in the room? All right, go find him, make him busy. In the Optiv booth, we've got the interactive graphic around what IDSA means, how do each piece play with each other, what use cases are supported, what the concepts look like. We also have an integrated demonstration in our booth. But by all means, the idea that cybersecurity investments should all find a way to work together on the context of identity is really what we're talking about. With that, I'll take a few questions before we turn it over to David Gordon to give an example of what that means from a SIM to IAM perspective. Yes? So this probably represents everybody. And I would say in our world, whoops, sorry. This is probably the 20 to 30% of folks. This is probably 50 to 60% of folks. And then this is probably the other 20%. And really, this is where everyone will go eventually. But here, maybe 5% of those folks are talking about that today. Yeah, I mean, I think we would classify all of them here. Like anybody who's still learning, still trying to understand what to do, for us, all classifies inside getting started. Any other questions? Come on, how does that not elicit questions? Yes, sir? Did Matt put you up to that question? So his question was, how do you correlate identities across user repositories, across user stores? And I think it's a very good question. It's much more infrastructure relevant than next-gen relevant in that it depends. I mean, if you have a correlating anchor attribute, then it's very easy. If you don't, it's some bit of fuzzy logic and math, and you in the organization trying to better understand who is who in the organization and how do you present that to people so they can correlate themselves. I think it's not an easy yes or no answer to how do you correlate. I think it's an evolution of how many repositories do you have? Do you have a common attribute across those repositories? Can you concatenate attributes to make an anchor attribute? Do you have something you can rely on, et cetera? What was the last part? Sorry. So the question was, what if you flipped it over and made it security-defined identity versus identity-defined security? I don't know that I understand the context in which you mean by that. Yeah, so I think from our perspective, in every one of these areas, right, SIM, UBA, fraud and risk, network security, GRC, PAM, CASB, DLP, EMM, data access governance, the one common element to all of those security investments is the context of identity. I don't know that you can necessarily flip that around. I don't know that you can necessarily say, we are secure, therefore we should understand identity. I think you can make the statement, we become more secure by understanding identity, whether identity is being used as an access control point, whether identity is a fulfillment mechanism, whether it's a piece of data you're using to leverage a decision. I think identity is relevant in every one of these areas, but I don't know that you can say the inverse. I don't know that these areas are any more, because they are who they are, more impactful on identity. I think identity, on the flip side, is more impactful to those who understand it. I could take any one of these and give examples, meaning I won't steal David's thunder, so I'll talk about fraud and risk for a moment. As you behave as an internet consumer, what you do, where you come from, what you authenticate to, how you authenticate. All of that registers from a profile perspective in a product like Threat Metrics, who's a member of the IDSA. And they start to build a risk profile relevant to you. Suddenly you're coming from someplace you've never been. Suddenly you're coming from hours that you've never logged in before. Suddenly you're trying to do things you've never done, even with a valid credential. All of those things move your risk profile and make you inherently more or less risky. Today, on its own, they make decisions around how risky you are to that environment. But they don't necessarily share with the access management vendor, hey, this person became more risky. Maybe we should shut off single sign-on and turn on multi-factor authentication. Now all of a sudden they're required to step up in their authentication rather than be allowed to SSO in. As your risk profile begins to deteriorate more or you become higher in risk, maybe now they're telling the identity governance administration product in your environment, hey, that person just became too risky. Scramble their password, disable their account, suspend their account. At worst, we've frustrated one single end user for a period of time until they can validate that they should be turned back on. But at best, we have remediated a hacked credential and a vulnerability to a breach that we didn't, in previous worlds, have ability to discover for some period of time while they were in our environment operating. That's the idea of identity helping define security, not necessarily security helping define identity.